So the little seminal moment, I suppose, for me professionally was going on Jacques Cousteau's boat in the mid-60s. So Calypso, the original Calypso, pulled into Mombasa Harbour, and my old man wangled a trip onto it.
Shaun Leonard spent a childhood which divided his time between the east coast of Africa and the southwest coast of Ireland, catching almost everything that swims from big game down to small minnows. From starting out in aquaculture, Shaun spent 2 decades as the head of Sparsholt College for land and environment-based industries, before taking up his full-time role as the director of the Wild Trout Trust. He also enjoys part-time fish pathologist duties, with a particular focus on parasites. He's now also embarked on his 6th decade as an angler, with recent scars from kayak fishing in Panama to prove it. So I'm delighted to invite you to spend half an hour in the company of the fascinating Shaun Leonard. So Shaun, welcome aboard, and thanks ever so much for giving us your time today to come and talk about all things fish, I guess, and a roller coaster career in fish pathology and all kinds of stuff that's related to that. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good to chat.
Indeed. So, obviously this is Fishing Discoveries, and this is, we like to try and join the dots between lots of different genres of fishing and break down some barriers to people kind of making those connections between different aspects of the sport. But I'm always interested in speaking to fellow anglers about how they actually got into it and their background. And I happen to know, because obviously we work together, so we know each other fairly well. I know that you've got quite a colourful sort of, background of things, but I just wondered if you might walk us through, for the benefit of everybody, your genesis into the world of fishing.
Yeah. So in summary, Paul, I've been fishing this year for 53 years, which I can't believe I'm saying, but it's true. And I think the most outstanding feature of those 53 years is that as every year goes by, I get worse at it. But I did start. I was blessed to be born in Mombasa on the east coast of Africa. So I spent my early childhood splashing around in and on the Indian Ocean, and then that was interspersed with returning to my family home in West Cork in Ireland. Which was also completely halcyon childhood. Yeah, I've been incredibly blessed. I had a very sort of Gerald Durrell type childhood of fiddling around with animals, mostly in the sea, and thus was sort of thus became just a fishaholic, really, which is what I am.
I'm so jealous. I mean, it's just because we talked about this a few times before, but it just sounds amazing, the fact that you kind of indulged that interest in the natural world. And obviously one of the greatest ways of connecting with that is with a fishing rod in hand. Can you actually remember the first time you hooked into a fish or you landed a fish? Can you remember that?
Probably, yeah. I mean, it would probably have been a tilapia on Lake Navasha in East Africa. And I would have been probably 3 or 4 years old, I imagine, because that was one of our migrations. But I also used to go out big game fishing with my dad with some regularity, and then nighttime spear fishing for crawfish, i.e. saltwater crayfish, and it just goes on, really. It's extraordinary. And I think so the little seminal moment, I suppose, for me professionally was going on Jacques Cousteau's boat in the mid-60s. So Calypso, the original Calypso, pulled into Mombasa Harbour, and my old man wangled a trip onto it. So I didn't meet Cousteau, but I went on his boat, and I suppose that was the catalyst for what turned into a career fish fiddling.
Fantastic. Yeah. I believe that, I mean, I've bothered you and sort of pestered to see if you had any photos from that sort of era. And I think that you might be able to bring us a little bit of a treat in that respect. So.
Yeah, well, you can call it a treat. I think one of the outstanding features of that time, and bear in mind this was the early 60s, was that, and with, I suppose, my father's generation, was that everything that was caught was killed. So the question wasn't, shall we kill it? The question is, well, we'll kill it, and what are we going to do with it? And so what I'm about to show you is something of a morgue, a bloodbath of.
Let's say it's a reflection of those of those times and the prevailing ethos. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, tragically. So this, I think, is 1964, and that's me and my sister. You can see that, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, rocking the hat and shorts combo there.
Yeah. I'm still dressed like that today, as you know. Nothing's changed. But so that fish would have been obviously ceremonially slaughtered, and then its next fate would have been that it had been strapped to the top of my father's car and then driven home.
So this is a fish that your dad caught, presumably.
Yeah. And then, so, we'd arrive home with this fish tied on the roof of the car, and my mother would be wondering what on earth she was going to do with the next 6-foot-long animal that was strapped to the top of Dad's car.
It's quite a considerable sort of poundage of fish flesh to sort of cope with, isn't it, really, on a cottage industry scale?
Yeah, and the tragedy is unbelievable. So I sort of live with the guilt of that all the time now. Yeah.
But it is hard to kind of to take that out of the context of the time and the place as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. But I do have other photos. So is this still working? Can you see this one, for example?
Hang on, you have to click back into screen share, I think.
Oh yes, good old me. Sorry, I'm struggling here a little bit. Forgive me. Right, back into share screen. It's like watching a dinosaur work a machine. This thing. Right. So yeah, this is sort of setting out on those kind of big game trips. So the other photograph was the end result, the catch. But as you can see, this was the sort of routine garb of micro shorts and long socks.
Absolutely, yeah.
Desert boots, and out we went fishing. Yeah.
Cool. So who's in the lineup here, Shaun? Who do we have here?
Well, the miserable-looking nipper at the front is me, and then I don't know who the other two gentlemen are. They're not my dad because he was evidently behind the camera.
Right.
But you might be able to see by the guy in the natty white shirt that this is a big game day because he's fishing with some fairly serious nylon and that leader wrapped around his right hand.
Yeah. It's like fly line.
Yeah,
it's a pretty let's say a good old beefy multiplier you seem to have got on there as well, strapped onto your
and
reel.
I still have that reel.
Does it work? Is the question?
Yeah, it does. It's a pen.
Let's take it out somewhere. Let's go and catch some fish on it sometime and let it ride again.
I've caught a lot of fish. I mean, my father won that in a fishing competition, and I caught a lot of fish in it, like blue sharks off the west coast of Ireland.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
See, that's what it's about. Yeah, it's these objects. I think they take on their own sort of degree of like personality and character of the whole experience. I think so.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. So this is forgive the fuzziness of the photograph, but this is now skipping to the other joy of my youth, which is fishing off the southwest coast of Ireland. So the old boy on the right is my uncle Peter, and my friend Johnny Shardlow on the left, and we're off out shark fishing, and again, I mean, it's the most beautiful setting. This is the open Atlantic that we're heading out into, and there'd be whales and turtles and all sorts of weird things that you'd see here too, just like Africa.
Fantastic.
But the end result was very similar in that whatever we caught, we killed it. So. Lots and lots of blue sharks have come back on that boat dead, and we don't know what to do.
And what, just out of interest, what happened to the blue sharks? What's the
so on this particular day, we had 6 fish. I remember it distinctly. We had 6 fish, and they were brought back. And there's a key up in the top left-hand side, like a slipway in the top left-hand side of that photograph, on which we put the sharks. We took a photograph, and then we dumped them back in the water. So. Yeah,
amazing, and then that's sort of kind of a bit of a quantum leap from there to then working for let's say a conservation organisation that's based around sustainability of wild stocks and that kind of thing. So that's
totally. Yeah.
A bit of a road to Damascus style conversion somewhere along the line, but
atoning for sins, I guess one could say, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is. I mean, I remember sort of reading, when I was getting into fishing myself, my older brother had sort of got into it just a little bit before me, and he'd sort of acquired quite a library of stuff. And I remember quite a few of these like Daily Mirror sort of publication books that were like, fishing teach-ins and stuff like that. And they were filled with photos of like, beach scenes with, the catch laid out, sort of going crispy and, large numbers of fish. And that's, that was part of the deal, wasn't it? It's
Totally
the aim of the game sort of thing.
Yeah. It was awful, really. I mean, I reflect on it. Yeah, definitely I'm atoning for sins. Yeah.
So fast forwarding from early years and just being fascinated and having the access to that within your childhood, how did you kind of get into, I mean, obviously it seems like a natural progression to try and look for that kind of thing, but how did you, get into the career based around fisheries and, as you say, fish pestering?
Well, I'm sure it's that. I'm sure it's just my childhood that, I was never far away from water, and I'm still never far away from water. It's, better than I, it's utterly in our blood, isn't it? Fish and fishing and being near water. So I'm really uncomfortable if I'm not near water. Yeah,
and I can totally empathise with that. But so what was your first like posting in that industry sort of after training or whatever else that
so my early career, I suppose, was more to do with fish farming, really. So again, that's another thing for which I'm atoning with time. So I started rearing baby salmon and sea trout on the west coast of Ireland in a very famous research institute called Parasitology, which is still doing fantastic research work now, particularly on things like interactions of farmed and wild salmonids. And I started there in the early 80s, but that was mainly about a fish rearing thing, salmon, mostly salmon. And then I trickled through fish farming for a little while. And I suppose that's what sparked my interest in fish pathology and fish disease. Because you see some quite bizarre things, some of which I'll show you in just a sec.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to it. Because I mean, I've sort of my own background in freshwater biology. It has been more around the ecology side of it, and then the interaction of pollution with that ecology.
Yeah.
And so I've got quite a decent sized blind spot with a lot of the the deeper kind of stuff around these organisms and things that cause problems for our fish. And I know that when you've spoken about it before and you've done presentations with Wild Trout Trust events, I've always been fascinated with the the stuff that you get into, and whether it's the scale reading side of it or whether it's the actual pathology side of it. It's I think it's something that a lot of anglers would do better. They do well to know more about and to be more conversant with, because obviously it directly affects their sport. But also just from that kind of just that interest and that fascination, that horrid fascination, if you like, with the stuff that goes on in biology. I mean, it's revolting in the best possible way. So.
Yeah, and revolting and intriguing. Yeah.
So just before we get into that, then, how many steps? So if we're looking at stepping stones from going out and harvesting stuff as a child, and then the sort of the fish rearing side of things, how many steps then to, let's say, moving to Sparsholt and teaching other people around that? I mean, it seems like a natural pathway to go from fish culture, aquaculture into that sort of environment as well. Was that the next career progression, or was there sort of little bits
it was.
between?
No, there's just a couple of steps, and then I went to Sparsholt. Yeah, so I spent 20 odd years at Sparsholt. Had some absolutely amazing adventures with the students, and many of which we still work with now. In fact, we employ somebody who was the two guys who were students at Sparsholt at the Wild Trout Trust. Two of our colleagues are ex-Sparsholt, and a lot of our contacts, particularly in the Environment Agency, are ex-EA guys. And we had some really, really good times. Occasionally, they might have learned a thing or two.
Well, I know that whenever we've been to the game fair representing the Wild Trout Trust, I mean, so droves and droves of people that you taught would come by and sort of, always spoke very highly of you, sort of, not in earshot, wouldn't want you to get too sort of too much of a pride boost from that. But yeah, your students definitely appreciated your approach and the time that you put in with them. So that was a wonderful thing to see.
Yeah,
So it seems like you enjoyed your time there as well. So.
Oh yeah, it was absolutely fantastic, and they were fantastic too. We had loads of really wonderful kids and a few other interesting ones, but lots of really amazing ones. Yeah,
Cool.
definitely.
So, fish pathology. I think if anybody's just listening to the audio on this, the video part of it and the visuals bit, I'll put it on the blog as well. So if you get a chance to then check it out, depending on how you're actually consuming this, I'll try and paint some pictures with words. But I think you really kind of need to see some of the detail on this. So I'll apologise in advance if you're only listening at this moment in time. As I say, worth checking out. Wherever this goes out, we'll put links to the blog and stuff as well. But yeah, let's have a walk and a wander through some of the weird and wonderful things that happen to fish.
I've got one just before we do. I've got one other photo which sort of brings my sea fishing adventures, my tropical sea fishing adventures, up to the latter day. Which is
please do go ahead. Yeah.
I went to Panama in February of this year, so a couple of months ago, just before the whole COVID thing kicked off. And we went with a guy called Sam Wadman on Panama Kayak Adventures, which was just the most extraordinary experience. I mean, fishing in kayaks in the Pacific, using lures and stuff, aiming to catch stuff like roosterfish, which we did actually. So this is one such rooster, which I'm told is not a very big rooster.
It looks pretty decent to me.
Yeah. So the sort of Richter's, my Richter's grin there is because that fish tore a bicep and destroyed my shoulder. In fact, I'm consulting with my specialist in 2 hours' time after this about how to rebuild my right arm.
I can remember.
Yeah, I know it's a grip and grin shot. The fish went back alive.
Yeah.
But most extraordinary experience, and I haven't caught any very big trout, but I've caught some quite big ones, but not monsters. But these things just pull on a different league. The fight of those animals is simply beyond belief.
Yeah, the closest I've come is I've seen some footage of people fishing in relatively shallow water, and the speed that they get up when when hooked is quite something.
It's quite extraordinary. Yeah, and the last fish that I hooked and lost was a tuna that cleared the water as it took the popper, so it was fishing on the top.
Yeah.
That thing was out to the horizon and towing the kayak at the same time. I couldn't physically pull line off the reel, but it was stripping line off like the clutch wasn't on at all. So
wow,
extraordinary, just amazing animals. Yeah.
An
adventure not to be missed. Anyway,
that sounds. Yeah. I'm so jealous.
Sorry to butt in.
Not at all. No. It's. Obviously, I'd seen one or two photos before, but yeah, that's just like you say. That visceral. The jolt of adrenaline that you get when a fish when it's that sort of out of control and that sort of physical, and you're getting beaten up essentially by the fish. Yeah. So it's.
I found that roosterfish was awful. The experience was just awful because I thought it was going to pull me in. I mean, it broadsided the kayak a couple of times, and then my bicep twanged, and it was truly chaotic.
Why not sign up for that? No, it does truly. It's a proper adventure, isn't it?
It's a proper adventure. Yeah.
Fantastic. So sorry, I almost cut you off with that story before, which would have been a terrible shame. But gruesome pics of fish and the things that happen to them when they contract some of these.
Yeah. So the thing about fish farming is it's a great way to learn about fish, albeit in a totally artificial environment, because you're dealing with livestock, you're handling them day to day, and you're seeing their trials and tribulations at first hand. And I suppose this is the the segue that you mentioned earlier on, this is what triggered my interest in fish pathology and specifically fish parasitology. But I think the three early conditions that really piqued my interest were, one is called gas bubble disease that happens in juvenile salmonids. So these are not my photos. These are ones that I've purloined. Oh no, this is my photograph. Yes. Can you see that? You can see that.
Yeah, perfect.
So this is a baby brownie that came out of an egg box scheme, and so this was sort of, supposedly wild fish, incubated, with the eggs incubated in boxes in the river, and all of the fish were dying en masse. So the guy asked me to have a look at them, and I can't explain why, but this is what's called gas bubble disease. So this fish has developed an embolism on the top of its head, as you can see, which is that bulge above its eye.
So this is, just reading off the scale, it's a 2.5 centimetre fish, a little brown trout fry, with a bump, a bulge on top of its head there.
Yeah, and you can see it's still a very young fish, apart from the fact that it's minute, but by dint of that, you can still see yolk in its belly. For those of you that are watching it on video, you can see it. And that embolism can build in some fish. So it's basically an air bubble trapped inside the fish's head, and it can explode. Either way, it's probably not an ideal thing to live with. But certainly if it explodes, it's fairly bad news for the individual fish, as you can appreciate. That was my photo. This one isn't. I took this one from a book on salmonid diseases. And this is a bacterial disease. It's called in fish farming parlance fin rot, which is almost euphemistic. If you look at the bottom,
I was going to say, where did it get that name from?
Yeah, I know, it's spooky, isn't it? But if you look at the bottom fish, the fin rot starts eroding the fins, which is okay. The fish can probably cope with that. And then in really extreme cases, it just starts migrating up the body. So it's the bacterium sort of starts munching away at the tissues.
Wow.
You can end up with the spine poking out the end of a fish. The fish is still alive and swimming around with its spine poking out the end of its peduncle, the wrist of its tail.
Gruesome.
Which is pretty gruesome, isn't it? Yeah.
It's not a great way to go, is it?
No, it's not great, no. And then the third disease that really captured my imagination was something called furunculosis, which is again a bacterial disease. It's endemic, it's in all water, but when fish get particularly stressed, they can go down with it. And it's a systemic infection. So what happens is you get these sometimes massive boils on the fish. And basically inside the boil, the tissue of the animal is just being eaten away. So again, I took this from a book, but you might be able to see, basically the guys have chopped away the top of the boil and exposed the tissue underneath, and it's all just sort of turned to pus and goo, really.
Yeah.
Yet that animal was alive. This is a salmon, but it's got a boil on its side, probably about the size of an apple or an orange, and
I think
lots of musculature.
Yeah, that thing as well is one of the interesting things about fish, I guess, is that they're kind of surrounded by a lot of these pathogens all the time. And if their immune system is working really well and they're not stressed, they can often cope with that. It's just that with a combination of stresses, sometimes those defenses get overwhelmed, and then it turns into sort of something as gruesome as that.
That's so true. That's exactly right. Yeah,
but that's a little bit different from like, let's say, a herd of animals where as long as there isn't an infection around, then the herd doesn't necessarily contract it. It's passed on from animal to animal. But swimming around in that soup of these different infectious things, you have to be able to cope with that and repel that as a fish. And I think that's a great one to flag up, that thing of, the coating of slime on the outside of fish and people returning fish and saying, oh, it swam away all right. But, if you've removed a lot of that slime because of poor handling, that's the first and one of the best barriers to stopping some of that stuff getting in and causing a problem in the first place. So.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. And you can see it. The reverse mechanism is that if fish pick up external parasites on the skin, their response is to produce excess mucus and try and slough it away, wash off the bug. So they're using that mucus very much as a defensive shield So you're so right, that we as anglers can break that defensive shield with a bit of careless handling. Yeah.
So yes, I mean, so in terms of your day-to-day sort of encounter, the way that you encounter this stuff, I mean, people send tissue samples to you or come to you with different cases and that kind of thing, or how does your day-to-day involvement with it manifest itself?
So my day job is with you at the Wild Trout Trust, and then my nocturnal activity is that I do health checks for fish farms and fisheries. Now, they might be in response to a clinical outbreak of disease, or they might be routine. So, for example, in England and Wales, if a fish farm wants to move fish or a fishery wants to stock fish, they need a certificate, a health check, if you will, from somebody like me. And they bring me a sample of fish, and I chop those fish up and look, in that case, for clinical signs of disease and also any parasites. And in England and Wales, there's a list of parasites which, if the fish have got them, they can't be live moved legally. There are one or two loopholes, like they can be moved into waters that are fully enclosed or have already got the parasite. But in broad brush, they shouldn't be moved if they've got these few parasites. And it's a list that the environment keeps up called a Category 2 parasite list. Most of them are not trouty ones. Most of them are coarse fishy ones. But there are one or two that do infect trout, and they're quite interesting ones. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And are there any sort of interesting case studies that you can think of sort of, outbreaks or things that you've come across and been involved with over the years?
Yeah. I mean, mostly on fish farms, the good fish farmers do a very good job in terms of fish husbandry. That routine livestock is important to them because obviously it's their living. So by and large, the fish that I get presented are in good order to inspect. But occasionally you see some parasites that have just gotten in and taken a hold and gone pretty mad. So I've got a few that I can demonstrate with on this presentation, on this PowerPointy thing that might sort of make the point. Here we are. I'm a huge fan of various types of tapeworms. I absolutely love the worms. And I got given these sticklebacks as part of a health check because some fish were being rescued from an urban pond. Not particularly sticklebacks, but a range of species. But these happen to be included in the sample. And when I'd euthanized the fish, I thought, that looks rather interesting, which of course it does, because a stickleback shouldn't have a lumpy tummy like that. The females get gravid when they're ready to spawn, but they're not lumpy like that. So for a sort of a fish disease geek, looking at lumpy tummies is always quite interesting. So a very gentle little incision with a scalpel on that stickleback produces these things that come out of it. So this is a type of tapeworm called Schistocephalus. And you can see, I rather stupidly didn't put a scale against that stickleback, but it's not a very big fish. But you can see there that there are over 10 of these Schistocephalus tapeworms inside it. And one of the intriguing things about the tapeworms, which I absolutely love, some of these internal worms, is that they change the behavior or the appearance of the fish. Because the tapeworm is using the fish as an intermediate host. And this is a really good example. So this is the tapeworm ligula. And you can see these are a couple of roach. There's a full set of tweezers in the top of the screen. So there may be, 5 or 6 inches long, those roach. And the bottom one, I've excised those individual worms from. And you can see that the largest of the worms, the top one, just below the lowest fish, is pretty much double the length of the animal that it's infecting.
Yeah.
And then each of those ones below are progressively smaller but separate worms. So this is the worm called ligula. And the interesting thing about ligula in terms of the fish is they compromise the development of the gonads in them. So they may make the fish functionally sterile by dint to the fact that if it's a female, there's no space in the gut cavity for eggs to develop, for the ovaries to develop, because it's full of worms. And the other thing is they start to interfere with the cryptic camouflage of the animal, because the belly of the fish distends. And so the silvering of the belly starts to become visible from the top. So if you're a fish like a roach, you rely on cryptic coloration. That means that, say, for example, a bird predator looking down on you in the water is looking down on your dark back. But with ligula, the belly starts to distend out sideways. So for a bird looking down on top of the fish, it sees the dark back, but it also sees the flanks of the fish, which are sticking out sideways and which are silver. So the bird looks down and thinks, oh, God, look, that's a fish, I'm going to eat it. And it dives down and eats it. And this ligula is actually looking to end up in the bird. So it's using the fish as an intermediate host, and it changes the body shape and the coloration, effectively, of the fish to make it more predatable by the bird.
Yeah,
brilliant.
It's very similar to invertebrate sort of. So I mean, there's tons of examples of this in biology, of course, but one that people might be familiar with is the Pomphorhynchus in Gammarus in freshwater shrimp, that gives them that orange dot that people, fly dressers, imitate with the orange spot shrimp. But that obviously makes it more likely to be eaten by. Here we go.
Yeah,
giving your talk for you. But that. That whole thing, the idea is it's not aiming to finish its life cycle within that Gammarus host. It's aiming to get into a fish beyond that. And I believe, I mean, you could probably fill in more details, but I believe it also, as well as making it more conspicuous, it makes it go towards predators instead of away from predators as well, I think.
Yeah.
So
they start to scurry around on the top of the bed of the river, if you like, making themselves more exposed. Yeah, so I mean,
sorry, I completely stole your thunder on that. So
it's very cool. It's very cool because this is probably my single favourite group of animals. So these are, in terms of parasites, these are the spiny-headed worms, and you mentioned Pomphorhynchus. So this is another one of them called Echinorinchus, which the thing about I've taken these from, in fact, the gut of a trout. So all I've done here is I've opened up the tube of the gut, and you can see there are just worms that look like maggots writhing one on top of the other. And they're anchored into the gut with a head that looks like that. So basically the worm drives this, what's called a proboscis, this sort of spiky head into the gut of its host fish, and then it just absorbs whatever's passing down the gut through its little maggot-like body. But the one you mentioned, Pomphorhynchus, has got an additional adaptation, which is this thing called a pneumatic bulb. So you do find Pomphorhynchus in things like trout, grayling, possibly. It loves particularly chub and barbel, and it uses the pneumatic duct, which is that bulb the pneumatic bulb, that ball-shaped thing, to drive the spiky head into the wall of its prey and anchor it right in there. And then it, like the other ones, it just sort of lives as a little maggot in the gut of the fish, absorbing whatever the fish is passing through its gut. And as you said, the beauty of it is that it again lives as an intermediate host in freshwater shrimps, and makes the shrimp more attractive to the fish to eat. Yeah.
It's phenomenal, isn't it? I love that kind of just the whole Machiavellian process. They need to get from that first host into the ultimate host, and the things that biology comes up with. I think whatever you can dream up, as a human sort of story writer or whatever else, is nowhere near as gruesome and or convoluted as some of the stuff that happens in nature.
Going on the whole time, yeah. So I think that may be all I put. Yeah, that was all I put together. But I just thought they were quite an interesting demonstration of
absolutely perfect. Yeah, spot on.
Favourite bugs. Yeah.
And it's the sort of thing as well, it's the sort of thing that is around us all the time as anglers. You're turning stones over, you come across this sort of stuff, and some of the fish you catch, unbeknowingly, are going to be part of that whole, parasite host interaction that's happening around us all the time. But without, delving beneath the surface a bit and drawing on some of the, the expert knowledge, then we're just not aware of it. So I think it's, super useful. I think people find that, really an interesting sort of dimension to, when they're going out on rivers and interacting with, these ecosystems and the fish that rely on them. So I think that's been really, really useful, I think. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Yeah.
Before we wrap up completely, I did want to touch on obviously it makes no sense at all to not acknowledge the fact that we both dedicate a good proportion of our time working for and with the Wild Trout Trust and the projects that are ongoing there. We're in the midst of some interesting times at the moment, so I expect people might be interested to hear where we're at and where we're sort of going with the current, local and more global situation that we're in at the moment.
In terms of the Wild Trout Trust?
Yeah.
So as we're filming this now, zooming this now, this is the 12th of May, and I have furloughed a number of my colleagues, 7 people in total are furloughed out of 13 of us. And I'm just now planning the return to work of the first 2 or 3 people, which is likely to be from June, 1st of June. So, the very practical nature of what we do organisationally has meant that something like COVID and the need for social distancing, and indeed in the earlier days, the need to keep away from non-essential travel, means that we had no choice but to hole up for a while. And so we're now ready, I think, to start to return. And so you and your colleagues in due course will return, and hopefully we can get back and do what we're very good at, which is practical work in the field, improving habitat for trout, but all sorts of other wildlife, and working with people along that journey. I've just done my sort of roundup gathering of stats from last year, and even though last winter was incredibly high water across loads of rivers of the UK, and then we went into COVID in March, it's still been extraordinary quite how much you and your colleagues have done in that year in terms of advisory work and practical projects and so on and so on. And I know that we've got loads in the pipeline ready for when you guys come back at full tilt.
Fantastic, yeah. And so I guess to wrap up then, and a sort of a positive look at where we're at. What was you've given? I think you probably are getting into the black now. You're back into sort of positive karmic balance with your respect to your early career and that kind of thing of sustainability of fisheries. But what is it about, let's say, the trout and the world of the trout? Obviously, we use it as a totem species, but it's not just about the trout; it's about the river system. But what is it about trout and the rivers that they live in that kind of drew you to be doing the stuff as director of the Wild Trout Trust?
I think it's aside from atoning for past sins, it's very much our conservation ethos organisationally, which I completely get. So I've sort of transcended the need to rapidly catch fish, but I really enjoy being out on the river and connecting with wildlife in natural systems. And I think that's a really important thing for us in terms of our well-being, as individuals and also communally. And that's what we as the Wild Trout Trust are very good at, I think, which is trying to ensure that rivers function as natural as possibly, not only for trout, as you said, it's our totemic species, but we work on the principle that if we've got it right for the trout, then it's right for a whole host of other animals and plants.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you ever so much for spending time and just giving us the benefit of some of your extensive experience today, Shaun. I've really enjoyed it. Of course, I'll put links to people who are interested within the stuff that the Wild Trout Trust gets up to. Wherever you're watching or consuming this, there'll be links to that. There'll be other relevant links if you need to get different versions of the content that we've gone over today. But just remains for me to say thank you ever so much again, Shaun, and I look forward to getting back to work and getting back to the helm as soon as we can as a fully functioning organisation. So yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for your
Paul,
time.
well done. Take care. Good luck. Thank you. Bye-bye.